Sacred Heart is proud to sponsor Pensacola Histories in recognition of the Daughters of Charity who brought their mission of care to Pensacola over 90 years ago.
Hello and welcome to the continuing story of Pensacola, North America's first place city. And in this period we've been talking about the evolution of education here in Escambia County, beginning our story, of course, with what the Spanish were able to do in their last period here up to the year 1821. And we followed the struggle for the formation of any kind of formal education here, which really did not get underway in Escambia County until the mid-1870s. And we picked up the story with the fortuitous change in our laws, which allowed the school board to appoint its superintendent. This began, of course, in 1885 with the administration of Nathan B. Cook, who would be our superintendent for 28 years. And we still remember N.B. Cook as the father of the education system locally. We took the story last time through various changes in this evolution up through the years of the 1920s, and we begin today talking about what the education was like here beginning in 1929 and 30. And like the rest of the country and the rest of the economy in this local community, the Depression years were very hard. The teachers' salaries were reduced, and at a point beginning in 1933, it was necessary for the school board to literally pay their teachers in scrip, which happily many of the merchants in the community would accept. But the teacher salaries were lowered, and of course the problems emerged parallel that with the families, because many times the students, if they could get a job of some sort, they'd had to do so to help the family along, and it was just a very difficult period. And of course, all through that period, all through that decade, there was almost no money available for either additions to schools, capital additions to school, or for quality maintenance. So we reached the year 1940, and something very unusual happened. Of course, what was happening in Escambia County was not unusual. It was present all the way across the state of Florida. So in that summer, a senator, a state senator in Tallahassee named Collins, Leroy Collins, pushed a bill through the legislature requiring a study. And this study was to be done in each one of the state's counties, and a team did come to Escambia County, and they visited each school. They took pictures of each school, and they got all of the fundamental data. And basically, we still have some of the surviving photographs which illustrate the same old one-room and two-room wooden schoolhouses still in operation here, and many of those better school buildings which had been built years before. They look fine, basically all right on the outside, but many of the conditions inside had deteriorated rather badly. But they made the study, and they discovered, of course, in that year, and this is 1940 now, Escambia County had roughly 15,000 boys and girls in school, and that the total budget for that year for the entire county for all school purposes was about $840,000. So we had that information, but of course within a matter of months, World War II began, and as it began, of course, the emphasis was on getting students educated, getting them through schools. But there was precious little change, with one exception. Recognizing the need for technical training to assist not only the local manufacturers but also the Navy, the county school board erected a new building down on West Garden Street, which was to be a sort of a manual training, a technical center. Dr. Emmelheist was the man who put in charge of it, and this served beautifully all the way through the war, did some wonderful work, and that building is still there, and of course today it is the headquarters of the Escambia County School Board. So they've gotten good use out of that building. Well, we come into the post-war years now, and things begin to change. By the time we reach from 1941 to 1949, our friend A.S. Edwards had returned to be the school superintendent, and Edwards did a very creditable job helping to improve standards of the schools, and also to look at, I guess we would say, look ahead. And Mr. Edwards was right on the cutting edge of the idea, as passed by the state legislature, to create a new level of education. And that came about, of course, in the legislative session of 1948. This is when of course, the GI Bill was just having a flow, sending a flow of former military people into the school system, seeking a higher level education, and of course, the legislature realized that the schools in Tallahassee and in Gainesville could not handle it all, so they made arrangements for the creation of what they called community colleges. Today we call them junior colleges or something equivalent to that. And a combination of school board of Escambia County and Santa Rosa County came together and agreed that they would establish the first such college in all of Florida. And they did. And in September of 1948, Pensacola Junior College opened with a building, leased building on the corner of Cervantes and Palafox Street. They had 13 teachers and 123 students as a beginning. And of course, that was when the great junior college system here began. Moving further into the 1950s, of course, we begin to see all sorts of other problems emerging here. By now, the ad valorem tax system was still operating in the same way. We still had a number of multiple school districts within the Escambia County itself, and each district was to support construction and maintenance of its own schools. But by the time we reach the latter part of let me be sure I get the dates right for you. Well, by the time we reach the midpoint of the 1950s, it is obvious that something new is happening to Escambia County. By now, we have been discovered, and we have new industries coming here, and as a result, the population is just soaring. And when Dr. Jesse Woodham took office in 1953 as a superintendent, he warned people that we were in for serious trouble because the school buildings themselves just could not handle all of the growing number of students that wanted an education. And so at that point in time, for several years, poor Dr. Woodham was saddled with, with the problem of overcrowding. And so at one point in time, late in the 1950s, we had more than 10,000 of our students who were on what they call double sessions. And that, of course, was a political hot potato for the educators. But ultimately, of course, new schools were built, and Dr. Woodham deserves a great deal of credit for the leadership he provided in doing this. Okay, we move into the 60s, and we begin to see a number of other things happening. Well, by now we have a growth in not only school numbers, but in high schools themselves. We see other schools being built. We have a greater competition between the schools in sports, a much greater emphasis on sporting events here, the building of stadiums to hold the sporting events. And of course, as each additional high school comes on board, they are equipped, each one is equipped with a auditorium type facilities for dramatics and for other activities. And now we begin to see more and more emphasis on education for what people call advanced education preparation. Because by now, we see more and more people wanting to get an education beyond the 12th grade. And so by the time we get into the 1960s, we see this is a pressure, because students are being asked to do more. They, of course, they have many more student activities that they can participate in beyond what they had been available to them about the year 1900. And the goal, of course, of their parents was to have the very best education for their own children that they could, anticipating that they might go on to a Florida State or a University of Florida. Well, as all of this is happening, of course, and this is, of course, not just Escambia County, it is statewide, there is a continuing pressure to get more money into the system. Remember a minute ago we talked about the study made in 1940 and how that had illustrated the shortcomings that we had here. Well, the same senator, Leroy Collins, was the man who, into the early part of the 1950s, created a new system that would pass the legislature. And it was a law which basically was called the Minimum Foundation Law, which meant that now the state of Florida was going to begin to provide funding for local school districts. I want to emphasize that point because it is of great importance, because up to this point, virtually every dollar that was available for any purpose in the school system was coming from the county itself. Now we begin to see substantial amounts of money coming raised by other purposes, through other methods from the state level, and it begins to flow into each one of the counties. Now that was good. You got all kinds of money that comes into play. However, as many of the educators would begin to tell you, that's fine, but it's the old story. If someone calls the tune, they're going to play the piper. And basically, some of the things that the state demanded of the local school systems were not popular here. And that, of course, continued to create situations of discord. By the time we get to 1967, we are also seeing a wave of new inflation in our society. And across the state, many of the teachers have now formed themselves into teachers' unions. And as a result of this, they begin to put pressure on higher salaries for teachers, greater benefits, and unfortunately, this comes to a head in the summer of 1968. And at this point in time, after long negotiations, the state teachers union and their local unions call a strike. And at that point in time, many of the teachers agreed to walk out. And it took a very exciting time because in response to that, the local Chamber of Commerce, which was led at that time by a man named Ted Nickinson, came together and they organized all sorts of volunteers. These were retired teachers. These were people who were homemakers that were qualified. They came into the system and began to work as temporary teachers. Ultimately, of course, the strike was settled, but there was disharmony and some very bad feelings for some time after that. Well, as we proceed forward in the total story of education, much of which, by the way, was recorded just a couple of years ago in this book, which is the history of our education in the community, which we have enjoyed here, basically the story that I've been telling you. We move into the later years, and we begin to see other things changing. It is in 1967 that the University of West Florida opened for its first classes, and that, of course, made a great change not only in what was available to students, but also in the focus of many families, because now it was obviously available that a son or daughter could afford a college education, where before this did not seem possible. And of course, Dr. Harold B. Crosby was the first president, and he put together an excellent faculty. And in the fall term of 1967, UWF, the Argonauts, became a reality. Okay, and we move forward now through a whole series of things that have happened to us over the last 30 years. It's impossible to telescope all of them into a story like this. We probably should not, because then we would perhaps be talking politics more than education. But basically what has happened to our community is this. We reached a maximum student population in the late 60s, early 70s of about 45,000. And that number has stayed relatively static since then, right? As this episode is filmed, we're sitting at about 43,000. And of course, the needs of the individual communities have changed as the neighborhoods have changed. And as a result of this, several superintendents, the one who's Jim Paul, who was our superintendent for a few years, and the current superintendent now, Malcolm Thomas, have been forced to close schools because it made no sense economically to continue to operate a school where there was not a sufficient student population. So all of this has come to pass. And of course, across the United States, there has been a continuing clamor that our education system has not been giving the total quality that should be had. And as a result, the national administration came forth with a program called No Student Left Behind, and all sorts of other mandates have come into play. And so as we reach the story, as this story is being, the climax as this story is being told, we are now operating with a student population of about 43,000. Our budget for countywide today has reached about $500 million, which is slightly more than the $5,000 Nathan B. Cook had back in 1885. We have a total here today of quite an excellent school system. We have 7 high schools, we have 12 junior high schools, and we have a wonderful teaching faculty, people who are doing their very best, trying to harness the computer to different forms of education. But who knows what our system is going to look like in just a few years. Are students going to be taught more by computer at home? Will the requirements of an education change? Well, we can't answer that question now. But again, I think in completing our story, we need to look back to the start of the program back in 1885, how far we have come since N.B. Cook literally had to have half a dozen books which he prescribed for his students. And again, we can give credit to the educators and the wonderful job they have done, because we have come so far in those 125 years.